Hello and welcome to Marker Development Video 4. In this final Marker Development video, I'll be discussing completing the general comments section of the marker feedback form. Hopefully by now you're familiar with my strategy for completing marking. I start with the specific comments, fill those out, then I complete the key points to bear in mind section, and then after that I'm fortunately at the grading system summary part of the form. This summary of the grading system is included in all of the blank marking templates, and I think that's a nice place to be at this point in time because it's the point at which I need to choose a evaluation of the essay, decide a percentage to assign it, and then I have to complete the general comments for that paper. So it's nice to have this kind of overview here right at the bottom of the evaluation form to make a decision so that when I go back up to the top, I kind of know where that paper falls based on the university's marking criteria. One thing to keep in mind here is that the comments you give in the general comments section should correspond with kind of the band of evaluation that you've assigned to the paper. So if the paper's in this distinction band, the comments you give in the general comments should be largely positive regarding the paper. And then, like I've mentioned in the past, if there's places where the student could have improved, it's good to mention those, but I think you need to make it clear how the paper achieved a distinction. And then marking that's in our papers, essays that are in the merit band, also are very good work that are well organized and presented. So you want to make that clear how it's very good work and how it's well organized and presented. You want to explain how that paper fulfills those requirements in the general comments. And then one thing I try to keep in mind is that in my experience, most students who receive merits are interested in knowing how to get a distinction, so I also try to let them know how their paper fell short of a distinction, what they could have done in order to push that paper up into the higher band, if that's something they're interested in. And then similarly, papers that have passed, that have gotten in the pass band, are reasonable to good work at the MA level, but they may have some problems that prevented them from being more successful. And so here you want to let the students know what they did right, and then also there's a lot more space to help them understand how they can be more successful in the future if that's something they're interested in. So what I've done is, based on those different bands, I've created a hodgepodge of general comments that I'll be going through in this video. So there's a distinction band, a merit band, and then a pass band. I've left off the failure band. I talked about papers that fail in video 3. Hopefully it's pretty clear to you that at that point in the general comments you can summarize why the paper wasn't successful, and then the students know what they need to do to fix the paper because you've mentioned that here in the key points to bear in mind. So I'm not going to discuss papers that didn't pass in this video. Starting with the distinction band, if you want to pause the video to read the distinction category and then the organization and references, please go ahead. Rather than read to you, I just wanted to note that the organization comment here is talking about the different parts of the paper and kind of the way the argument's clear. I'll often mention signaling here. In this particular evaluation, the signposting of the signaling is done in the presentation. I don't think that it matters where you put that, so long as if it's a attribute of the paper worth commenting on, you'll want to comment on it at some point in your general comments. With the references, I don't count the number of references that are in papers, but I've seen some markers do. Rather than count them, I say that they've demonstrated reading well beyond the required reading for that module, or that they've effectively used the core reading for the module very well in their essay. And then at the analysis, relevance, and presentation, if you'd like to pause the video to read those, please go ahead. And one thing I forgot to say earlier is please don't try to think that all these comments are coherent on one paper. What I've done is gone through probably 24 papers that I've had assessed over the course of the last 5 or 6 years and kind of pulled out key comments that I thought were interesting and worth sharing in the video. So these are kind of a hodgepodge of different marker stuff. I got a little bit tired of using my own things for the videos. So these are examples of what other people have written largely, although I've edited them a little bit for clarity and coherence. So with the analysis, you can see that it's largely positive, and then there's a final sentence that lets the student know how perhaps they could have done even better with the paper. And then relevance is one that I find is often difficult for me to write very much about. So I was particularly interested in finding examples where the markers wrote more than one line of feedback for the student. And then presentation, I think, is pretty straightforward. You notice that there's that comment about signposting, which I mentioned earlier. And then finally, overall kind of summarizes the comments and lets the student know how the evaluation was arrived at. And you'll notice here there's that dissenting sentence again, saying that, you know, if they had considered dissenting views, that could have added more robustness to the discussion in the essay. And I think I should also note that when you complete these feedbacks, you don't need to write this much, but I thought it wouldn't be very good for these videos if I just gave you one-line comments for each of these general comments. I tried to find a little bit more robust comments to share in these videos, but please don't feel that you have to write as much as is shown on the screen here. I think probably trying to get 2 or 3 lines for each of the categories is a good minimum, and then I think this kind of 6-7 line reply in the organization is probably about the maximum that you'll want to be writing, because you do want to keep these general comments to 1 page. Moving on to the merit band. If you'd like to pause the video to read the band summary and then organization and references, please go ahead. Sorry, I was trying to get my cursor out of the way. It doesn't want to do that. For organization, those comments are largely positive. I think saying something about the signaling in the paper, the signposting, might be a good idea there. I don't know that it's mentioned in the presentation later in this particular one. For the references, here's where the markers letting the student know that they could have improved on the way they use their references. And I think this is a pretty common attribute of some students' paper, that they treat the literature that they cite as definitive. So-and-so said this, and so that's the fact, that's the fact, that's the way the world, they kind of defined the way the world works, and that's very rarely the case. So some critical analysis of the literature that's introduced into essays is generally a good idea. So I think that's probably a comment that's applicable to quite a few students' papers. And then if you'd like to pause the video to read the analysis, relevance, and presentation, please go ahead. So here in the analysis, I find this is one place where there's often a lot of space for critical comments. And I like how this marker's kind of noted that the essay is doing the skillful synthesis in several places, but then in other places it's an uncritical presentation of what the literature said. And then particularly what I find is students who are struggling with staying within the word count will take essential information, put it in tables, and then because they've put it in tables, there's not that space to comment on it, which ends up negatively influencing the essay. And then with relevance, like I said before, this is one particular category that I have a lot of difficulty finding a lot to say about. So I was particularly happy to find this marker's kind of extended comment on the relevance of the paper, talking about the issue of balancing description and analysis, and how that's an issue that the student could have perhaps found a better way to accommodate. And then the presentation, I think, is pretty straightforward, and if you'd like to pause the video to read the overall, please go ahead. And I think in the overall, it's a largely positive comment, but here in the last sentence is letting the student know how they could have potentially improved the paper, which will hopefully help them with their future assignments. And that's all I've got to say about the merit band. Next I'll move on to the pass band. So if you'd like to pause the video to read the band summary and then the organization and the references, please go ahead. And here you can see there's kind of more hedging in the organization category, fairly well organized. And then there's some confusion. And then this kind of note that it didn't affect the coherence of the essay, but that there was a little bit of a mismatch between the way the organization introduced the paper and then the way the paper actually ended up going. And then here again, there's that same kind of weakness in the references, perhaps a bit more pronounced in the paper, but I like how the markers pointed it out. So you're attempting to synthesize reviews into your analysis, and then other citations are kind of put out there, but it's not, the student doesn't make it clear how they're related to the essay question being addressed. And then if you'd like to pause the video to read analysis, relevance, and presentation, and overall, please go ahead. And then here again with the analysis, you can see that there's that positive evaluation. It is adequate. Sorry. But much of the essay is descriptive, and then more attention to kind of implications, innovations, applications would have strengthened the essay. And then relevance, again, it's nice to see a kind of 4-line reply for relevance. And there you can see the kind of the note that there's some places where there's information that was tangential, but that it's largely relevant. And then here, this language is skillful, but there can be some problems with syntax, spelling, grammar, some proofreading problems. And then some problems with figures. One thing that I think it's important to note is if you say something like this, problems with your figures, it's important that in the specific comments further down you note what those problems are, including a sentence like this here, but then not including any comments. And the specific comments about what that actually means leaves the student wondering what they had done wrong. And if you realize that you didn't kind of comment on those later on in the essay, I think this particular section is just fine, taking that comment out. And then finally, overall, you can see it's good work at the MA level, and they demonstrate key knowledge, and then you've got problems in presentation, and then a need for greater depth of interpretation and analysis. And that concludes this video series. Thank you very much for listening.